Welcome to In the Lab with Hoopsology. I'm your host, Matt Thomas, joined by my best friend and co-host, Justin Goodrum. Justin, how you doing, man?
Doing really well. It's been an active week just in the NBA, the finals coming up, in the WNBA. Lots of attention, so not a shortage of things to discuss. How are you, man?
Man, I'm doing well. Looking at the numbers, this is our 29th episode, specifically of this part of our show that we do. So pretty incredible how quickly that has flown by, and we are inching our way towards the end there. Want to give a quick shout out to you, the viewer and listener, and or both, all of the above. We appreciate your support. Thank you for being with us this season and in previous seasons, following along the coverage with us for another exciting season of basketball across the board. And if you have a friend that's interested in basketball, sports, likes these higher level discussions and interviews, especially with regards to basketball and basketball culture, please share our show with them. And once again, thank you for supporting us. So, Justin, I'm feeling good. I've got my Dunksternaut shirt on. We're ready to go. We're ready to rock for this episode. We have a lot to catch up on that you mentioned. I mean, we still need to talk a little bit about the conference semifinals in the NBA that wrapped up. We'll touch on that a tiny bit before we get into our NBA finals preview. But what I want to ask you to lead us in with has completely dominated my timeline. And maybe that's a little bit in part due to the NBA being on a break, but it's also because there's been a lot of traction around it. And that's the recent controversy in the WNBA. Can you lead us off and let us know the situation and what's going on here?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Matt, the WNBA has been garnering a lot of attention this season. A very popular rookie class. I mean, it's been talked about to death. I mean, if you listen to this podcast, you know the storylines. Highest rated draft in WNBA history. Huge rating increases across all the platforms for all the WNBA games, and that's due to, of course, mostly to Caitlin Clark as well as the rest of the rookie class. So, regarding the Indiana Fever, they have struggled this season. They, I believe, only have 2 wins. As the recording of this podcast, got a home win this past weekend in a very grueling battle against the Chicago Sky, a game that I watched, went back and forth. The Fever didn't really shoot particularly well, but they got the job done.
That's a
In
pretty
that,
good win.
yeah, it is. It's a solid win. And in that win, Caitlin Clark took a cheap shot. Now, there's been a lot of debates and really a lot of debates about this league, and there's been a lot of attention drawn to what is the discourse, should people be discussing the WNBA. And today, it just reached a fever pitch in terms of the discussion that took place on ESPN, on First Take, on Pat McAfee. It was just a disaster from a PR standpoint for that network. And for the Fever, they actually get a break. And you mentioned, Matt, when we were planning the show, they had 11 games in 20 days. They get 5 days off before they play on Friday, a much needed rest. Their coach, Christy Sides, has stated that they are mentally and physically exhausted. They're just beat up. Caitlin Clark only had 3 points in her latest game, I believe, is against the New York Liberty. She didn't play that well. She had something going on with her ear. We don't really know what's going on with that. If someone can correct me in the comments, we really don't have any further clarification. Aaliyah Boston got hurt in that game as well. So the Fever, they're hurting right now. They're just beat up. And I think there's a lot of ways to discuss what's going on within the WNBA. And I want to ask you, Matt, kind of to give your overall thoughts of what we're seeing with the WNBA this season, because I think, not to pat ourselves on the back, but we have been discussing the WNBA ever since we've launched this podcast back in 2020 from the pandemic, in terms of the rising of popularity through Sabrina Ionescu, through different things. We've had our experts really shine light and enlighten us of what's happening in this league compared to what's leading on now. So if you don't mind, Matt, can you kind of give your thoughts as to what's going on with kind of the discourse regarding Caitlin Clark, just the rest of the players? Are you comfortable with this whole discussion of how the league's being covered, how the discussion's going? Like, how do you feel about what's been transpired so far? Because there's a lot of storylines that's been happening just in terms of, media stories, there's players, there's, all these different things. And I just kind of want to hone in on kind of your overall thoughts and what you're feeling about the WNBA this season so far.
Yeah. It's a good question you bring up there, Justin. And I think um, we had an interview, I believe, about 2 months ago. And in the moment, I'm blanking on the guest name. Maybe you can help me out, from the Washington Times, I believe, who basically, when a WNBA player was questioned, her response in sort of a heated
Yeah.
question was, "Are you with us or are you against us?" Which really, if you are an honest member of the media, you're looking to find the truth of the matter. You're looking to find the player's thoughts in this case, or the fair answer to the question. You're not really looking for kind of like a personal bias, or like a raw type of moment when you're questioning an athlete typically. Now, I mean, there are specific biopics and things along that line that, yes, you can argue certainly the other way, but that's a digression. We're talking about coverage in what's going on in the court, whether that be failures or successes. I think you and I try to stay honest and balanced. We give our honest thoughts. And yes, there are opinions involved, but we're also trying to be fair to all parties involved. When you put out the messaging that you're wanting to be not subsidized by another league, when you're putting it out there that you want your own TV deal, you want to be public figures, you want stars on parallel with stars in the NBA right now, like more lucrative shoe deals, higher ratings, more exposure, things that you and I have talked about on this show, you do open yourself up to the public forum. My personal opinion would be there should be uh, a certain level of respect that any athlete gets. Um, and I think not everyone abides by that code. And you see that in some of the discourse. I don't know necessarily that I would say that for this particular incident between Clark and Carter, which is kind of what we've been alluding to, and the foul that happened in that game, the Sky versus the Fever. Um, but this, so I guess, long story short, what I'm saying is this is part of the process. And if you want to go the optimistic route, you are seeing things populate your timeline the way your timeline was populated when Draymond Green was, you know, I'm exaggerating here, but when he had his arms around Rudy Gobert's neck, you're seeing your timeline populate that same way. Difference is this is WNBA. This is a foul, kind of a shoulder block that, yes, you could argue there was a little flop, a little like taking that momentum and taking advantage of it with Caitlin Clark. But you're seeing argument on all sides, I would say. And yeah, you have trolls out there pushing one way or the other. But I do think you're seeing arguments on both sides, like, no, this is way too much. This is way too harsh. And no, this is not harsh enough for what this situation is. So I'll throw it back to you, Justin, because I would like your same thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So what you're alluding to when you first started off was our interview with Ben Strauss of the Washington
Thank you.
Post.
Sorry, Ben.
And no, yeah, all good. And funny you bring that up because Angel Reese was fined, I think, $1,000. We got
Right.
the press release about her not doing media availability.
Right.
So this has been a constant issue with the WNBA, and I agree with you. So there's a couple of things, and this is where it gets into a nuanced discussion. Number one, I think historically, I've said this a million times, and I stand firm on this. The ESPN has been a poor TV partner for the WNBA, and I think this season I would give them a C plus. And there's been some great things. There's been some bad things. That's number one.
Hey,
Number
they're
two,
passing.
huh? I'm
I
sorry.
said, hey, they're passing.
Right, right. That's true.
No,
But
I hear you. I'm sorry.
I think for a league that is associated with the NBA in years past, their coverage has been disappointing, and especially in the state of streaming, where I've said this multiple times. There's the NBA Today that's hosted by Malika Andrews, and they're like patting themselves on the back because they have a segment about the WNBA. It's like, you have a streaming platform, you can't give them their own show. Like, this is where your television partner It's one of those things where, for instance, Matt, if I talk about a restaurant and let's say 5 of our buddies talk about a restaurant, we talk about how bad it is. Are you going to go to that restaurant? What are the odds? Are you like, what's percentage? Are you going to go to this
Probably
restaurant?
not, unless I've heard something really credible on the other side from someone I trust more than my friends. So probably not.
So, yeah, exactly. So when you have TV partners, that's supposed to be their objective is to promote this league to the best of their ability. When they don't, what do you expect the public to do? And I think the problem is everybody wants to turn this into like a race war, right? Like everybody will say, well, there's promoting her because she's white and the rest of the players are black. But how many great white players are in the WNBA? Name them. Sabrina Ionescu, Brianna Stewart. Diana Taurasi scored 30 points. She's 42 years old.
And
People thought her.
arguably the GOAT.
Where's her buzz this season? Where's Sabrina Ionescu's buzz? She had what thing do you remember from All Star Weekend this past weekend this year in the NBA? What was the number one most remembered moment
Right,
in
that
that weekend?
three-point contest. Yeah,
Thank you.
between Steph Curry, yeah, and
Where's
Sabrina.
her attention to this? So I don't want to hear just one segment of players are just being ignored. All the players are being ignored. And I get their feelings of having frustration, of jealousy. That's been coming up. And to me, it's like, so what? So I don't understand. So my question to you is what are these players supposed to do? Because I've heard from the players so far. They've been very appreciative of Caitlin Clark. They've been, hey, she's great for the league. It's rising the popularity of the sport. They've been very nice, but they've mentioned she's going to struggle. She's a rookie. So if we've had these discussions before we come on the air. What are the players supposed to do in terms of respecting, like quote unquote, kind of the main person driving the attention to this league? What do you want the players to do? I'm genuinely asking the question because I'm trying to understand what the responsibilities of the players of this league is to Caitlin Clark to make sure that the WNBA is continuing to rise in popularity and capitalizing on Caitlin Clark's momentum.
Right, good questions. I think one thing that's important to realize, and I realize I'm kind of sidestepping, but I'll bring it back, I hope.
Yeah, sure.
Um, when you and I talked just a few weeks ago, we talked about the coverage differences between the Knicks and the Pacers.
Yeah.
ESPN has a history, as does almost all media. I can't say all with certainty, but almost all. Everything that's relying on your clicks, which is a lot. And in fairness, there's some societal blame because we click on what we click on at the end of the day.
Valid.
But in some cases, we don't have the opportunity to click on other things when it's not provided. But anyway, zooming in a little bit, if you look at this situation, I mean, Caitlin Clark is the New York Knicks here in this analogy, maybe a poor analogy, but come with me on it. And then the rest of the league is the Indiana Pacers in terms of that coverage. There's just not a lot of talk about it. When we give that one segment that we're so proud of, it's being spent usually on Caitlin Clark. And I think that's because of the hype coming in and that it's assumed by the media, my guess would be that this is an instant hit. This is going to get us the clicks that we want, the success that we want. Now it's a step in the right direction that there is more talk about the WNBA in general as a result of this, because even out of this is this narrative of that I've seen not only from you, my friend, but from other people too, talking about where is this recognition. So it may be kind of an indie undercurrent sort of take, but it is something that people in the media and beat reporters and others are saying. And so eventually that does, I think, lead to more and more coverage. Now, going back to your question about the players, I just want the players to play. I think you play hard fouls, great. You challenge Caitlin Clark. You do what you do. You compete as a professional competitor, I think is the appropriate thing to do. And unfairly, there may be a little bit more of a metaphorical target on Caitlin Clark back because of the microscope that the media is putting on her. And you can understand, it's just like when Kobe was playing Jordan, he wanted to go all out. He wanted to, he wanted to take Jordan's heart. And and other players who are genuine competitors like Diana Taurasi, I would expect she wants to show up Caitlin Clark, and that's healthy for a competitor to do. I think what you don't want to see is cheap shots and things along those lines, which I would argue we have seen some cases of that are a little bit out of bounds. But that is something that happens in the NBA too. That's something that's happened in the WNBA before. Competitors get heated and tempers flare. Things like that happen. Ideally, you don't want to see it, but this is part of competition.
Okay, we align because when we talked during text, I was like, I'm trying to understand. I was just like, do we align on this or not? Because to me, I 100% agree with you. Like with the Kennedy Carter foul, I mean, that was a cheap shot, unnecessary basketball play. How was it wasn't a frequent fouls beyond my comprehension? It got ruled out the day later. Light moves on, whatever. But it just seemed to be some kind of this crisis in terms of why is she being fouled like that. Like you have a lot of people that are commenting on this that and we're talking about prominent basketball analysts that are you're supposed to be covering basketball. Like this is part of the game. And what I don't understand is when I watched on First Take and some other people, they're like, well, you should be protecting the asset. Like even Shannon Sharp, like Monica McNutt brought up the comparison of if there was a superstar linebacker and Shannon Sharp was going up against him, would you not use some maybe dirty tactics to get ahead or anything you would do to get an edge? And you said no, he's making a tons of money. It's like I believe that like that's a lie. And two, you play offense. So if the roles were reversed, that linebacker I don't believe is going to take it easy on that tight end. If it's Travis Kelsey, like look, Travis Kelsey's super popular. Like he's bringing a lot of eyeballs to the league. If Travis Kelsey's hurt, is Taylor Swift going to the games? Probably not, because Travis Kelsey's probably not going to be there. So are these football players thinking, well, Taylor Swift's bringing up all this money, we can't hurt Travis Kelsey? No, like what are we doing? What are we doing here? Like I just think it's ridiculous. Like you're saying, Matt, physical play is part of sports. I think violence is a part of sports, and I think there's to way to enforce this if we're looking about protecting the asset. It is the league. Like you were saying, 11 games in 20 days is ridiculous. Rebecca Lobo said it's the toughest schedule since 2007. I mean, why are they having this brutal of a schedule where not all their games are not on national TV? You're not even capitalizing on the momentum because it's not like all these games are on national TV. You have to get WNBA League Pass to see them or Ion, which not a lot of people have. So what is the point of them playing this insane schedule? I mean, I guess I suppose it's attendance, but what moves the needle is television ratings. So I don't really understand the motivation there. So that's my issue with this is just this whole situation of just trying to baby or protect Caitlin Clark. All the other players, they're just have I don't know, they're out to, hurt her in her career. I just have that's one of the huge problems I have with this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think we've seen evidence of that, even in things that I would describe as cheap shots. I don't think it was with the intent to sideline Caitlin
Me either.
Clark.
I
I
agree.
think it was overreactions, heat of the moment type of
Yeah,
things. I think still unwise things, like things you don't want to see a basketball player doing, just generally speaking.
sure.
But that's stuff that happens in professional competitive sports. I want to go back to something that you
Yeah,
said before we move on to the schedule, because I've thoughts on that too.
sure.
On the player to player level, I agree with everything you outlined there. I think when you look at that conversation about protecting the brand, that's sort of a different perspective. And you're right. What we're about to get into is the hypocrisy of that schedule. If that's really your concern about Caitlin Clark getting hurt, then why are we having this frequency of games for the Fever? But I would say what maybe we saw the foul on Carter get upgraded to a flagrant foul. I do think that's the right call. I have no problem with that. Um, I think what you may see behind the scenes, I have no knowledge of this, but my guess would be there will be behind closed doors conversations with players of, hey, and it may be a general statement. It may not be, and it probably shouldn't be, don't hurt Caitlin Clark, but it should be, a conversation. If I'm a leader in the WNBA, if I'm Kathy Engelbert, let's say, it's a conversation of, hey, we have a grueling season, as we always do. Our sport is very physical. We have a landmark season on our hands here. We have broadcast rights coming up. Let's please play smart out there and, avoid these non-basketball type of fouls, things like this, like an email or something like that, or maybe coaches giving messages to teams. I don't know. But somewhere a message going out, hey, we got to protect the brand. This is a huge year. This could be the biggest year in our league's history and set us up for generations of success.
I think that's a good point. And I wanted to disagree with you, but then my mind went to what happened during the NBA All-Star game and what happened, with this whole secret rule change in the league, NBA getting more physical. And
Yeah,
that's not out of the realm of possibility of them doing it in secret. So I don't know why they would do that. I just think from a PR move, you would just be like, hey, cut out, just chill out on the physical play. We're going to have more suspensions if this continues. And this is not the only instance in terms of Caitlin Clark suffering these hard fouls. So has Angel Reese too, and other rookies. Regarding the 18 games in 20 days, from a team perspective,
11 games in 20 days.
11 games. Sorry, 11 games in 20 days. From a team perspective, I want to ask you: do you think that Caitlin Clark's teammates have failed her? This is a very, like you said, this is the most attention the Indiana Fever's probably ever have gotten. I would probably argue even more than their championship season. And I was talking with my girlfriend. She had an excellent point. We talked about that press conference, with that reporter saying that cringe statement. Did you notice her coach didn't really have her back in that situation? Like, did you notice her coach? Did she notice her coach wasn't like, I don't want this guy ever to be near this team ever? Did she notice that? She brought that up as an excellent. That set the tone for what's been going on this entire season. Matt Barnes really expanded upon that in terms of when she's getting knocked down, where are her teammates? And Monica McNutt said something I totally disagree with this. She's saying, well, their teammates may not be that way. That's not in their character. They don't want to be suspended. This is not wrestling. This is not like, somebody gets beat up and the NWO comes and, it's steel chairs and, like it's a brawl. Like, but there should be some pushing, some shoving. Hey, don't mess with my teammates, something. Your coach, we should be seeing at least, I don't know, this might be overstepping my bounds here, but how has not the coach has been ejected a couple of times is beyond me. Like, if I'm a coach, I am being ejected. Eject me out from this game, basically, from what my players being treated. And that's a huge problem to me. And that's Matt Barnes is right. That's why they have the poor record as they do. These are not poor players. Like, there's a whole thing of the Indiana Fever suck, their players suck. And I think I said that in the beginning of the season, just in a very ignorant comment on my part. I've seen these games. They're not bad players. These are not terrible players. You have 2 number 1 draft picks in a row. And you know basketball, Matt. Have you ever seen he mentioned a team that's had 2 number 1 draft picks have a record like this and go through all this turmoil? I mean, I can't really think of.
I'd have to look, maybe like the 90s Clippers or something, but
yeah, that's
I'd have to go back.
I mean, not only that, but like these are not, I would say, bust draft picks. I mean, this is not a situation where these are like, the draft sucked and these are mediocre picks. These are 2, dominant players in college, and that's an understatement. So I think her coach has failed her. I think her teammates have failed her in terms of getting through this schedule in one piece, and it's led to this point where I think it's been a disaster.
Yeah, it does make me wonder what's going on behind the scenes. Like, has Caitlin Clark yet had the appropriate amount of time to earn the respect of her teams, her teammates, that is? Has it been a more difficult hill to climb to earn that respect because of all the media hype coming in? Like, is there maybe odds against her in that aspect as well? Not maybe just the other people wanting to compete with her, but also hesitancy from the teammates. Obviously, it seems to make sense to you and I to want her to succeed no matter what if you're on her team with her, because her success is our success if we're on that team. And I would assume the players feel that way. Maybe they just do not know how to react in these situations yet. And you're right to go to the coach in those types of situations. Like you made a very good point about you should be getting ejected. You should be doing something to set that example, set the tone, and light a fire under your team and show them that example of how you act. Like if you see Caitlin Clark get, shoved to the floor in the back, you should be outraged by that. And you should be protecting her, getting up in that other player's face to send a message. I'm not saying fight or be violent or anything like that, but there should be consequences when someone comes at your teammate.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, look at Teresa Weatherspoon and look at the Kennedy Carter situation. She was getting asked tons of questions about Caitlin Clark. She didn't want to answer it. The reporter kept asking her. Teresa Weatherspoon's like, don't answer that. Next question. That's protecting your team right there. I just don't see that with the Indiana Fever. And there's been other things, too, that's watching this team that's been peculiar to me. And I would love to get a person that actually is, has history covering this team in the past and familiar with Christy Side's coaching style, the coach of the Indiana Fever, just to see, if my, suspicions are correct in terms of benching Caitlin Clark in certain parts of the game, or even in this most recent game where they're just so spent and are getting crushed by the Liberty and they're still playing. They're out there in the fourth quarter. Like, I don't know. There's just things from a coaching perspective. I don't understand what's really going on, where I understand, the WNBA season where it's brutal. Like you play the national title game, you get drafted, limited training camp, and you're into the season. Totally get it. But there's been some things where it's just been peculiar watching this team, and they should be better than their record, in my opinion. I don't think they should be leading the league. But
Right.
from what I have seen, they're not this terrible team that I think the media wants you to believe.
No disagreement from me there. And I want to make one more point about what we've been discussing. And let's talk about that schedule, the 11 games in 20 days, because that is something that directly, this is proven by actual research that if you have more back-to-backs, you are more likely to lose second games of back-to-backs. 11 games. I don't know specifically how many back-to-backs the Fever have had. I know it's been more than one back-to-back, certainly.
Yeah.
I would guess potentially even more than 3 back-to-backs in those 20 days. If you are the WNBA, here's my question. We could talk about the coaching and the strategy and all this and the rotations and getting the appropriate rest, load management, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
But if looking high level, again, making ourselves commissioner or whatever we want to do, I have this rookie who's made our draft the most popular draft we've ever had. And I'm going to all of a sudden throw her into the fire pit, like throw her to the wolves so that she has one of the worst records in the league. That seems to me like mismanagement. I get that you want, I don't mind starting the Fever on opening night. I think that's totally appropriate. And that did happen. That's great. But why is it that, your preseason pick, Justin, that I think, of course, most people would agree is a great pick, the Las Vegas Aces, right? I'm blanking on this. The Las Vegas Aces, why have they only played 6 games? Almost half the amount of the games that the Fever have played in this time. They should be a very marketable team as well. I get with the college crowd coming in, maybe they don't have the same exposure to those teams. But what difference does it make if Caitlin Clark had 3 to 4 less games at this point, and she's getting the appropriate amount of the rest along with her teammates, less chance of injury? I don't think that hurts the brand at all to go at a regular pace to open up her career. I just don't understand this scheduling move at all. And by the way, I'm a person who's kind of along the line of, we have a lot of rest and recovery science here. We're getting better at this. I'm a little bit less sympathetic to the load management stuff, but in terms of looking at this at competitive advantage versus other teams, when you have a greater frequency of games, you're more likely to lose games in that period than other teams.
Yeah, We align on this because look at from a television perspective, how many games of the Fever have been on ESPN? Very few. And I think that I don't have the correct data, but basically it was around like a week and a half in terms of when there was a WNBA game on ESPN compared to their next appearance. And now I think it's a week in terms of a game per week, which I don't have a problem with just due to their schedule and the teams and everything. That's where I have a problem. And I agree with you because to me, if you're going to have her play this much, then all of her games should be on TV, the national TV, not on NBA TV, not on regional, not on League Pass, not on Ion. Should be on ESPN or CBS. And that has not happened. So to me, this is a poor strategy. That's number one. Number two, I think in terms of kind of these games and everything, in terms of the aces and everything, I am trying to give the league a little bit of slack just because of how many teams are in the league so far. They're expanding to Toronto, expanding to San Francisco. Hopefully, we won't see this with league expansion and with them having more roster spots and with the TV deal coming in. That might be an adjustment. This might be a temporary thing. So hopefully that is an adjustment. So I am going to give them a little bit of grace in that regard. But in terms of Indiana Fever's particular schedule, you're right. It's ridiculous. I don't. To me, if they were putting on national TV, there at least to be some kind of methodical plan in place. But these games have not been on TV, and that's a huge issue. And we're seeing them being run into the ground, and then I don't know. It's unfortunate because they're just physically spent at this point, and it's a bummer to see. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to feel sad when watching basketball. It's not a good feeling.
Yeah, and I don't think I feel sadness, but I just feel like it's an intentional imbalance that
It is.
didn't need to happen.
Agreed.
So it's just weird, and I think if you're looking at games are spaced out, maybe you're not playing against all the marquee teams like it feels like they have been doing, and maybe you start your season 4-4 in 20 games rather than 2-9 or
Yeah.
wherever their record sits right now. Caitlin Clark looks a little better too, and has a little bit more mystique, and there's hope, like, oh, what is she going to do? Is she going to make the playoffs in her first year? Whereas now that situation already looks kind of bleak. Not that it shouldn't have been based on where the Indiana Fever sit, and they did get her in the first pick of the draft. But still, I just think it's a better management of that. Anyway, sounds like we agree on this. Justin, before we move on to other topics,
Yeah.
any other early storylines from the WNBA? I don't want to be a hypocrite here. I know we've spent most of the time talking about these. Granted, these have been big league-wide issues that revolve around this, but what other storylines are you seeing from the W that are catching your attention?
I think the rest of the rookies, I think that's been really interesting. Seeing this Cameron Brink. I mean, and what makes Cameron Brink very unique is that she plays 3x3 as well for Team USA. And she was getting a lot of buzz even before she even put on an LA Sparks uniform. So that's been pretty cool to see. I think Angel Reese, just her as a personality, I think she's already a star in this league just based on what she says. I think that's been very compelling. I really like the New York Liberty. I was really impressed with the Chicago Sky, even though they lost. And then with the Aces too, I know they're 4-2 as recording of this podcast, but they suffered a couple of injuries. There's a lot of good storylines in this league. The Phoenix Mercury, Brittany Griner got hurt, but yet, Diana Taurasi, which we talked about her earlier, she's been carrying them. So there's a lot of great storylines.
And that's not even to mention the 8-0 Connecticut Sun.
Correct. They have
the
been
best start in their franchise history.
And that's been brutal. They had to play the Fever twice. It's just like, God, why do they have to play this like dominant team twice? So that's been brutal. I think Carmela Cardozo, she had limited time when they were playing the Fever. She looked awesome. So that's going to be interesting how that works with her and Angel Reese. They're going to play them together. That's an interesting dynamic because you have two kind of similar players there. So overall, there's a lot of great storylines. I just hope that the mainstream media, when they mention Caitlin Clark, just mention the other players, because this is not a team. This is not a league full of scrubs. This is not a situation where Caitlin Clark she's the first great player and the rest of the WNBA is trash. That's not true. Like, let's show the respect to the rest of the players in this league. And let's show the respect to Caitlin Clark as well. That I was, talking earlier. I think she has a possibility of being a Hall of Fame player. And there should be some grace in her first rookie year. And I think a lot of WNBA rookies, they struggle. And I think, this is not a situation of like Candace Parker where she wins MVP and Rookie of the Year. I mean, that is a anomaly that speaks to the greatness of Candace Parker. And I don't think we're going to see that with Caitlin Clark, unfortunately. But that's okay. And she's going to struggle, and it's going to be all right. And I haven't seen anything that's like she can't play in this league. She can't play in this league. But like you said, I think the WNBA did her a disservice with this schedule, and they did the NFE a disservice too. And hopefully with this rest, we can see kind of a revitalized Indiana Fever team.
Absolutely. So as always, you guys, let us know in the comments your thoughts about these controversies, about if you think the league has kind of mismanaged with that schedule as we suggested, if you agree with us or if you think we're off base. Always love to know your thoughts about that.